Black CEO and white heiress scandal, leaked receipts exposed a billionaire lie. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You stole from my father. The sentence didn't rise. It detonated. The orchestra faltered mid-note.
Crystal chandeliers trembled in soft gold halos against white marble walls, washed in cool blue light.
The ballroom had been designed to feel immaculate ivory glass and legacy. Now it felt like exposure. Marcus Hale didn't move. Black tuxedo. Perfect line.
Champagne glass steady in his hand.
Across from him stood Eleanor Whitmore's satin teal gown, catching both blue uplight and chandelier gold diamonds, tracing her collarbone like armor. Her posture was rigid chin, lifted not in grief but accusation. I have the wire transfers, she continued louder now. Hundreds of millions. Right before my father's health declined. Phones began to rise. Whispers followed. Inheritance fight. Corporate theft. Always something with money. Marcus felt it. That shift. Not from celebration to scandal. From guest to suspect. A foundation director, pale, sweating, furious, shoved through the crowd. This is a legacy event, he shouted, voice cracking. Security, get him out of here. 2 guards stepped forward. Not touching him, but close enough to make a point. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had funded nearly a third of this renovation. His company's endowment carried the scholarship program named after her father. Yet under the blue-white wash of the walls, surrounded by rows of white tuxedos and pearl-lined necks, staring at him with thinly veiled suspicion, none of that capital mattered. In this light, he was simply the black man being accused. You think a tuxedo makes you one of us? The director barked, finger pointed so close it nearly grazed Marcus's chest. This family built this institution on whiteness, on inheritance, on bloodlines. No one said it, but it hummed in the air. Marcus had seen that look before. At 24, when a banker asked if his acquisition funds were verified. At 31, when a board member suggested he bring in someone more reassuring for investors. Different room.
Same temperature.
But tonight cut deeper. Because he hadn't just attended this room. He had preserved it. Eleanor stepped closer. Her perfume was sharp, expensive, controlled. You positioned yourself as his protector, she said. But you drained him. That word. Drained. Marcus's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Not enough to shatter it, but enough that the tendons in his hand surfaced under the skin. He remembered the hospital corridor. The quiet hum of machines. Her father gripping his wrist and whispering through oxygen, if I go, you protect her.
She doesn't understand what's coming.
Marcus hadn't taken. He had absorbed debt. He had leveraged reputation. He had put his name on risk no one else would touch. And now he stood trial under chandeliers he helped keep lit. Escort him out, the director, shouted again, losing composure. We're not turning this into some spectacle. Marcus finally moved. Not back. Forward. One deliberate step. The guards hesitated, because the calm in his face had changed. It wasn't distant anymore. It was personal. You're very comfortable accusing me, Marcus said quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but the silence forced the room to bend toward him. Are you equally comfortable reading the entire agreement? Eleanor's jaw tightened. The director scoffed. We've seen enough. No, Marcus replied, eyes locked on hers now. You've seen what fits the narrative. The blue light cooled further. The gold felt harsher. The room was no longer whispering. It was waiting. Marcus inhaled slowly, not angry, not defensive, but tired of being audited by rooms he financed. You don't get to erase 20 years, he said evenly. Not in a building I helped save. And this time, no one moved to touch him, because the accusation had landed, but so had something else. Control. And it was shifting. No one clapped. No one defended him. But no one laughed anymore either. The orchestra remained frozen boughs hovering above strings. The blue uplighting against the white walls felt colder now, almost surgical. Gold from the chandeliers no longer looked warm, it looked interrogative. Eleanor didn't step back. But she didn't advance either. You think this is about narrative? She asked, voice tight but steady. This is about timing. The transfers happened weeks before his cognitive decline was made public. There it was, the insinuation that he had known, that he had taken advantage. A murmur moved through the sea of white faces behind her donor's board members, old money wrapped in silk and discretion. Marcus felt their eyes measuring him. Not listening. Measuring. The foundation director stepped closer again, anger curdling into something uglier. We vetted you because of your so-called philanthropy, he snapped. But don't confuse donations with lineage. Lineage. The word landed heavier than theft. Marcus let it hang there. I never asked for lineage, he replied calmly. I was asked for liquidity. A few heads turned. Not in agreement. In surprise. Eleanor's grip tightened around the cream envelope in her hand. You inserted yourself into my father's company, she pressed. You positioned Hale Global as a temporary stabilizer. Then somehow you walked away with controlling influence. Temporary stabilizer, someone whispered behind her. Controlling influence, another echoed. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he said. Because every other firm in this room declined to touch it. The air shifted.
Subtle.
But real. He could see it, one older board member avoiding eye contact. A venture partner studying the floor too carefully. The director barked again, desperate to regain control. This is not the forum for corporate revisionism, no, Marcus said evenly. It's a fundraiser built on the illusion of benevolence. That makes it the perfect forum. A sharp inhale rippled across the ballroom. Eleanor's composure cracked just slightly. You're deflecting, she said. If you're so confident, why not release everything? He held her gaze. Everything, he asked, quietly. Yes, every communication. Every transaction. The challenge was public now. Irreversible. The director turned toward the crowd. You see, he shouted. He's stalling. Marcus finally set his champagne glass down on a passing tray. The crystal made a soft, deliberate sound. He reached into his jacket, slow enough that security tensed, but not enough to escalate, and pulled out his phone. Not as a weapon, as a decision. You're right, he said, eyes never leaving Eleanor. Let's not do this halfway. The ballroom stilled. Behind him, blue light reflected along the marble like a frozen tide. Carla, he said into the phone, voice calm but no longer restrained. A pause. Then prepared to release the full ledger. Silence expanded. The director scoffed. You think dumping documents will save you? Marcus looked past him at the wall of pale faces at the donors, who had once shaken his hand when markets were rising. This won't save me, he said evenly. It will clarify you. Eleanor's expression flickered. For the first time, tonight uncertainty. And somewhere in the crowd a single voice whispered, what if he's telling the truth? The word ledger did something to the room. It stripped the glamour off it. Blue light still washed the white marble walls. Gold still shimmered from the chandeliers. But suddenly the ballroom didn't feel like legacy. It felt like evidence. Eleanor recovered first. You're bluffing, she said, though the edge in her voice betrayed calculation. There's no version of those records that explains away the timing. Marcus didn't answer her. His phone remained at his side screen, glowing softly. Across the room, several guests' devices buzzed at once. Then more. Then, a wave of vibration spread through silk clutches and tailored suit pockets like a silent alarm. The foundation director frowned. "What is this?" A board member near the stage glanced at his tablet. His face drained of color. "It's a shared archive," he muttered. Marcus finally spoke. 20 years of transaction history," he said calmly. "Every board approval, every email thread, every amendment. He let that settle. No redactions." A donor near the bar adjusted his glasses, scrolling. "Wait," he murmured. The first capital infusion wasn't a transfer. It was collateral backing. Another voice joined in. "He personally guaranteed the debt a third." He absorbed the shortfall. Eleanor's posture stiffened. "That doesn't change equity distribution," she shot back. He still walked away with leverage. Marcus turned toward her fully now. "Yes," he said, "because leverage was the only thing keeping your father's lenders from dismantling the company." The director stepped in again, desperation overtaking fury. "This is financial spin. You manipulated complexity." No. Marcus cut in, not loudly but sharply enough that the interruption stunned the air. "I prevented liquidation." Silence. One of the older trustees, silver-haired, visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "I remember that quarter," he said slowly. "We declined additional exposure." No one corrected him. No one could. Eleanor's grip on the envelope faltered. "You exploited his trust," she insisted. "He was under stress. Vulnerable." Marcus's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something heavier. "You think I didn't know he was under stress?" he asked quietly. "I was in the room when your legal team walked away." That landed. A ripple moved through the crowd, not whispers now, but recalculations. The director tried once more. "This is inappropriate. This gala is not a courtroom." "No," Marcus agreed evenly. "It's a monument." He stepped forward, the blue light catching the sharp line of his jaw. A monument funded by risk most of this room was unwilling to take. Phones continued to glow in hands across the ballroom. A younger associate near the stage spoke without realizing it. "There's an email here," she said. "From Mr. Whitmore." Eleanor turned sharply. "What email?" The associate swallowed. "It says Marcus is the only one willing to stand with us. Protect this partnership at all costs." The words hung in the air like a dropped glass that hadn't shattered yet. Eleanor's breathing shifted, just slightly. Marcus didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply held her gaze. "You wanted everything he said. Now you have it." And for the first time that night, the room was no longer waiting for his downfall. It was waiting for her response. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was dangerous. White marble, blue undertone, gold light flickering off crystal. The room looked exactly the same, but the hierarchy had shifted. Eleanor's fingers trembled barely as she reached for her own phone. Her screen lit her face in a colder glow than the uplighting ever could. She scrolled, stopped, scrolled again. "That email doesn't prove intent," she said too quickly. "It proves influence." Marcus didn't blink. In crisis, he replied, "Influence is survival." A few heads nodded before their owners realized they had moved. The foundation director snapped. "This is absurd. You flood the room with documents and expect everyone to suddenly rewrite history." Marcus turned toward him slowly. "I didn't flood the room," he said evenly. "I opened it." A trustee near the stage adjusted his tie. "There's more," he murmured, eyes still on his tablet. The second tranche wasn't a withdrawal. It was a debt restructuring. Another donor chimed in. And the equity conversion clause, it was triggered by missed bank covenants. The words weren't emotional. They were factual. And facts were colder than accusations. Eleanor stepped forward, heels sharp against marble. You structured it that way, she said. You knew he'd miss those covenants. There it was. The pivot. Marcus felt the weight of the room again, this time not suspicion but tension. He inhaled once.
Slow.
Measured. I structured it so the company wouldn't collapse under them, he replied. Her eyes flashed. You positioned yourself to inherit control. No, he said quietly. I positioned the company to survive. A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Because survival wasn't romantic. It wasn't legacy. It was math. The director laughed harshly. Oh, please. You want us to believe you were some kind of savior? Marcus's expression hardened, not aggressive, but resolved. I didn't come here to be believed, he said. I came because I was invited. That landed. The invitation had been public.
Celebrated.
The Foundation's social media had posted his attendance as proof of partnership. Now the optics were unraveling. Eleanor's composure thinned. You benefited, she said. You expanded globally within 18 months of those transfers? Yes, Marcus replied. Because the market rewarded stability. He stepped closer, not invading, not threatening, but closing the emotional distance. Your father's company stabilized. So did mine. A younger analyst in the back whispered almost involuntarily, the timeline checks out. The words hit Eleanor harder than the documents. Her jaw tightened. You still took control, she said. Marcus's voice lowered. I was offered control. The ballroom felt smaller now. Less gala, more reckoning. He didn't look at the crowd anymore, only at her. You wanted the full record, he said evenly. You have it. And for the first time since the accusation detonated, Eleanor wasn't the one holding the center of the room. Eleanor's composure didn't shatter. It thinned. Just enough for the room to see the effort it took to hold it together. You're reframing a hostile takeover as heroism, she said, voice steadier than her breathing. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Because this wasn't about contracts anymore. It was about something older. Something the documents couldn't fully capture. He stepped back once, not retreating, but widening the space between them. You were 23, he said quietly. The ballroom stiffened. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Don't, she warned. You were 23, he repeated. And your father had just lost 2 major lenders. The board was preparing emergency dissolution. The blue light along the marble felt colder now. Less flattering. More forensic. You weren't in those meetings, Marcus continued. You weren't in the calls when the banks asked whether the Whitmore name still carried weight. A murmur rippled. Names carried weight in rooms like this. Until they didn't. Eleanor's voice sharpened. I was his daughter. Yes, Marcus said softly. You were. The words were landed heavier than any accusation. I was the one in the room when he admitted he'd overleveraged expansion. I was the one he asked to step in publicly so the markets wouldn't panic. That's convenient, she snapped. No, Marcus replied. It was humiliating. That shifted something. Because humiliation wasn't part of her narrative. He held her gaze, not aggressively, but openly. He told me, Marcus said, voice lower now, forcing the room to lean in, that the Whitmore legacy mattered more than his pride. Eleanor's breathing hitched, barely audible. And what about yours? She demanded. You expect me to believe you risked everything out of loyalty? Marcus didn't look away. I risked everything because no one else would. Silence. The Foundation director started to speak, then stopped. Because the room was no longer reacting to outrage. It was listening, Marcus continued. Do you know what the market was saying about your father that Quarter Eleanor said nothing? They called him reckless, Marcus said. Overextended. Finished. A trustee shifted uncomfortably. That language disappears in obituaries, Marcus added quietly. It doesn't disappear in boardrooms. Eleanor's chin trembled just slightly. You're exploiting grief, she accused. No, Marcus said. I'm honoring context. He reached into his jacket again, slow, deliberate, and pulled out nothing this time. Just memory. He asked me not to tell you how close it was, Marcus said. He didn't want you to carry that weight. The blue light caught the moisture gathering at the edge of Eleanor's lashes, though she blinked it away before anyone could confirm it. That's not your decision, she said. It wasn't, Marcus agreed. It was his. The room felt tighter now. Less divided. More uncertain. And uncertainty was dangerous because it cracked certainty. Marcus's voice softened, not weak, but human. You're fighting a version of me that never existed, he said, because it's easier than accepting the version of him that did. That struck. Not loud, not explosive, but precise. And for the first time since the accusation detonated, Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She hesitated, and the room noticed. The hesitation didn't last long. Eleanor straightened, pulling her composure back into place like a tailored coat. You're very skilled at storytelling, she said coolly. But none of this changes the structure of the deal. There it was again. Structure. Control. Ownership. The language of power. Marcus nodded once. You're right, he said. That surprised her. A flicker of recalculation passed across her face. The structure matters, he continued, which is why you should probably read all of it. A subtle ripple moved through the room. He didn't raise his phone this time. He simply looked toward the massive LED screen behind the foundation stage, the one that had been looping donor names all evening under soft blue light. Carla, he said quietly into his earpiece display page 42. The screen shifted. Donor names vanished. A scanned legal document replaced them crisp, magnified, undeniable. The header read, Equity Conversion Contingency Emergency Stabilization. Clause the room stilled. Marcus didn't look at the screen. He watched Eleanor. Scroll, he instructed. The clause expanded. Lines highlighted. Trigger activated only upon written request from Chairman Whitmore. A pause. Then a signature. Not Marcus's. Her father's. Dated, aid, time-stamped, witnessed. A low murmur rolled through the ballroom like distant thunder. That could have been signed under pressure, the foundation director's snapped voice no longer booming, just brittle. Read the next line, Marcus said calmly. The screen shifted again. Clause requested and drafted at chairman's insistence to avoid forced liquidation. The trustee from earlier stepped closer to the stage, squinting. I remember this emergency session, he muttered. We declined to co-sign. Silence. Because that meant something. It meant Marcus hadn't cornered the deal. He had been the only one willing to stand inside it. Eleanor stared at the screen. Her lips parted slightly. You benefited, she whispered. Yes, Marcus said. He didn't deny it. Yes, I did. That honesty unsettled the room more than defensiveness ever could. But benefit isn't theft, he continued evenly. It's consequence. The blue uplighting washed across the white walls, making the document glow almost sterile. You think control equals exploitation? Marcus said softly. I think it equals accountability. Eleanor's eyes flicked back to him. And you expect me to just accept that she demanded? No, he replied. I expect you to accept that your father made a decision. The foundation director tried again. This is corporate spin dressed up as sacrifice. Marcus turned to him. No, he said firmer now. This is documentation. He stepped slightly toward Eleanor, not invading but closing the emotional gap again. You wanted everything released? He reminded her. The room felt less hostile now. Less certain. Less unified. Some guests still watched him with guarded skepticism, but others were rereading, re-evaluating, reconstructing. Eleanor's voice lowered no longer for performance. For him to sign away majority control, he must have believed he had no choice. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. He believed he had one. The words landed gently. But they cut deeper than accusation. Because now the story wasn't about what Marcus took. It was about what her father chose. And that was harder to fight. The room had stopped whispering. Now it was calculating. Eleanor stood beneath the chandelier's blue light, tracing the sharp lines of her cheekbones, gold catching in her hair. The document still glowed behind her, page 42 frozen like a verdict no one had expected. "You're isolating one clause," she said, voice steadier now, retreating into strategy. "Contracts are ecosystems. You don't get to cherry-pick context." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "You're right," he said again. Another surprise. "Carla," he added quietly, "pull the correspondence thread for March 14th. Full chain." The screen shifted. Emails replaced legal language. Subject line, re-emergency capital structure confidential. The timestamp appeared. 11:42 p.m. Sent from her father's private account. A few guests leaned closer instinctively. Marcus didn't read it. He didn't need to. Eleanor did. Her eyes moved across the projection, scanning faster than her breath could keep up. "Marcus, if this becomes public, they'll call it desperation. I call it preservation. Do what you need to. Protect the company. Protect Eleanor from the optics. R.W." The ballroom seemed to shrink. No one moved. The foundation director opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because this wasn't spin. This was voice. Eleanor's lips parted slightly. "That doesn't prove," she began.
Scroll, Marcus said gently.
The next email surfaced. "Board won't support additional exposure. They're distancing themselves. You're the only one willing to sign personally. I won't forget that." A trustee near the stage shifted uncomfortably. "We advised caution," he murmured. Marcus didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Eleanor. "He asked me not to show you that," Marcus said quietly. "He didn't want you to see how alone he felt in that room." The words didn't accuse. They revealed. Eleanor swallowed. "He wouldn't have described himself as alone," she said almost reflexively. No, Marcus agreed. "He described the board that way." That landed harder than any raised voice. Because now the room wasn't evaluating Marcus. It was remembering itself. Blue light reflected off polished marble like cold water. Gold shimmered overhead, beautiful detached. "You built this narrative," Eleanor said, "but there was less certainty in it now. You made yourself indispensable." Marcus's expression softened, not in triumph, but in something closer to regret. "No," he said. "He made me necessary." Silence. Not stunned. Not scandalized. Just exposed. The documents were no longer abstract numbers. They were timestamps of fear, of decisions made at night, of pride swallowed quietly. Eleanor looked back at the screen, then at Marcus, and for the first time, the accusation no longer sounded like certainty. It sounded like defense. The emails stayed on the screen. No dramatic fade. No music swelling back in. Just black text on white light, and a room full of people who had once been CE'd. Eleanor stepped back this time. Not dramatically. Just one measured step, as if the marble beneath her heels had shifted. "This still doesn't explain valuation," she said, but the force was gone. "You scaled Hale Global aggressively after the conversion." Marcus nodded. "Yes." No hesitation. "Yes, I did." A ripple of tension returned, but thinner now, more analytical than accusatory. "You leveraged Whitmore equity to expand internationally," she pressed. "That wasn't preservation. That was ambition." Marcus finally turned slightly, addressing the room instead of just her. "It was stabilization," he said. "Whitmore Manufacturing had global contracts tied to performance guarantees. If my firm hadn't grown in parallel, those guarantees would have collapsed. Several donors exchanged looks. An analyst near the bar spoke under her breath, "That's structurally true." The foundation director tried to regain footing. "So you're saying your success was charity?" he scoffed. "No," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm saying it was symbiotic." The word hung there. Symbiotic. Not parasitic. Not predatory. Mutual. He stepped toward the screen and pointed not to the emails, but to a small attachment icon in the thread. "Open the attachment." The screen shifted again. A forecast model projected losses under 3 scenarios. Scenario A, no external intervention liquidation within 6 months. Scenario B, partial lender extension, forced asset sales. Scenario C, full equity-backed stabilization, long-term recovery. Scenario C was highlighted. Signed beneath it, R. Whitmore. The room inhaled collectively. One trustee whispered, "We rejected Scenario C." "Yes," Marcus said evenly. "Because it required personal exposure." Blue light washed across pale faces. Gold flickered above like something ornamental and useless. Eleanor stared at the projection. "He chose this," she murmured. Marcus didn't soften his answer. "Yes, Sess." The director's voice cracked smaller now. "He was under pressure." "So was I," Marcus replied. That stopped him. Because pressure had been treated as unilateral, as if only one family had risked anything. Marcus turned back to Eleanor fully. "I put my company on the line too," he said. If Whitmore had failed Hale, Global would have collapsed beside it. The room absorbed that, not as drama, as exposure. Risk wasn't one-sided. Ambition hadn't been opportunistic. It had been entangled. Eleanor's eyes lifted from the screen to his face. And for the first time, she wasn't fighting him. She was reconciling her father, and the room, once eager for spectacle, was beginning to understand it had misjudged the wrong man. The room had changed. Not loudly, not theatrically, but permanently. Blue light still bathed the marble walls. Gold still shimmered overhead. The orchestra still stood waiting for a cue that hadn't come. But the gaze had shifted. Marcus was no longer being measured. He was being reconsidered. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "If he believed this was the only path," she said, voice lower now, less performative, "why didn't he tell me the full risk it wasn't an accusation?" It was something more fragile. Marcus studied her for a long moment. "Because pride doesn't disappear just because numbers do," he said quietly. A trustee looked down at his shoes. Another guest cleared his throat and said nothing. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "He trusted you," she said. "Yes." The simplicity of the answer unsettled the room more than defense ever could. "And you think that absolves you?" she pressed though the sharpness had dulled. "No," Marcus replied. "It obligates me." Silence. The foundation director shifted again, searching for a foothold. "This is emotional manipulation," he said weakly. "We're drifting away from the financial facts." Marcus turned toward him, calm, direct. "No," he said. "We're finally including them." A few quiet nods appeared, small, almost reluctant. Eleanor glanced back at the screen, at the forecast model, at her father's signature beneath Scenario C. "You gained majority control," she said. "That part is still true." "Yes, Sess." "And you kept it." "Yes, Sess." There was no denial, no justification wrapped in sentiment, just ownership. The honesty disarmed the air. "I kept it," Marcus continued evenly, "because the market stabilized under unified leadership. Splitting control mid-recovery would have triggered panic." A younger board member whispered, "He's not wrong." Eleanor looked at Marcus again, really looked at him now. Not as adversary, not as intruder, but as the man who had been in rooms she had never seen. "You never once tried to push me out," she said slowly. "It wasn't a question." Marcus's expression softened, but only slightly. Your seat on the board was guaranteed the moment you asked for it, he replied. A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. Eleanor blinked. I never asked, she said. And there it was. The question she hadn't known to ask. Marcus didn't move. Exactly. The word exactly didn't echo. It settled. Eleanor stared at him, confusion overtaking accusation. What does that mean? She asked. Marcus didn't look away. It means your father carved out a board seat for you in the restructuring draft, he said evenly. Non-voting at first. Full voting rights after performance stabilization. A murmur rolled through the trustees. That was never activated, one of them whispered. Marcus nodded. Because it required a formal request from you. Eleanor's breath hitched. I was grieving, she said quietly. Yes, Marcus replied. And I wasn't going to force you into a room you hadn't chosen. The blue light along the walls felt less sterile now. More honest. The foundation director's voice cracked again, brittle and small. So you just kept control, Marcus turned, slightly addressing the room, but still speaking to her. I kept the structure intact, he corrected. Control wasn't the point. Continuity was. He paused. Every quarter I left that clause untouched. The screen shifted again. A final page surfaced. Deferred board activation pending beneficiary confirmation beneath it. A handwritten note scanned into the archive, do not trigger without her consent. M.H. The room absorbed it slowly. Not applause. Not outrage. Just recalibration. Eleanor stepped closer to the stage, eyes fixed on the note. You never told me, she said. No, Marcus agreed. Why, he inhaled once. Measured. Because you were 23, he said softly. And the market was brutal. I wasn't going to make you choose between grief and governance. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. The trustees weren't looking at Marcus anymore. They were looking at her. Not as heiress. As stakeholder, the foundation director shifted awkwardly, realizing too late that the narrative had slipped entirely from his hands. Eleanor turned back to Marcus. The anger was gone now. What replaced it wasn't gratitude. It was reckoning. You could have erased me, she said. Marcus's voice didn't rise. I could have. A beat. I didn't. And for the first time that night, the room wasn't deciding who was guilty. It was deciding who had shown restraint. No one rushed to clap. No one rushed to apologize. But the energy had fractured. The blue light that once made Marcus look isolated now illuminated something else, the gap between perception and proof. Eleanor stood motionless for a long moment. You let me believe, she said quietly, that you took something from us. Marcus didn't interrupt. You let the board treat you like an opportunist, she continued. You let the press frame you as aggressive? Yes, he said. The simplicity unsettled her. Why? She demanded. The question wasn't sharp anymore. It was raw. Marcus stepped slightly closer, not invading, not cornering. I didn't need credit, he said evenly. I needed stability. A trustee exhaled audibly. The foundation director looked smaller now, no longer red-faced, just pale. That's convenient, he muttered weakly.
Marcus didn't even look at him.
It was expensive, he corrected. Silence. Because expense carried weight in rooms like this. Not just money. Reputation. Optics. Narrative. Eleanor's voice dropped further. You could have activated my board seat without telling me. Yes. You could have diluted my shares during the secondary expansion. Yes. You could have absorbed Whitmore entirely when the market peaked. Yes. Each answer landed like a hammer, not defensive, not proud. Just factual. And you didn't, she whispered. No. The orchestra members shifted slightly, uncertain whether they were still needed. The foundation director tried one final time. This doesn't absolve the imbalance of power, he snapped. He still holds controlling interest. Marcus turned toward him now. Calm. Unshaken. Yes, he said. Because when the recovery period ended, no one here volunteered to assume that risk. The room felt the truth of that. Board members avoided eye contact. Donors studied their phones. Memory was returning, and it wasn't flattering. Marcus turned back to Eleanor. You accused me of theft, he said quietly. In a room I helped keep solvent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize the moment. But the weight of it pressed against every chandelier in the ceiling. You weren't fighting me, he added. You were fighting a version of your father that makes you uncomfortable. That struck. Not cruel. Precise. Eleanor's shoulders lowered just slightly. Behind her, the projection still displayed the clause, the email, the handwritten note. Evidence didn't shout. It endured. The foundation director's earlier command, get him out now, echoed in memory like a miscalculation. The accusation hadn't collapsed loudly. It had eroded. Under documentation. Under patience. Under restraint. And in its place stood something far more destabilizing than scandal accountability. No one asked security to move again. No one raised their voice. The chandeliers still burned gold. The marble still reflected blue. The orchestra still stood frozen in anticipation. But the spectacle had dissolved. In its place stood something quieter, heavier. Eleanor faced Marcus without the armor, now no raised chin, no sharpened accusation. Just clarity arriving too late. I was told you positioned yourself strategically, she said softly. That you waited for weakness. Marcus studied her. I did, he replied. A ripple moved through the room again. Not outrage. Recognition. I waited, he continued evenly, for the moment your father decided what survival looked like. He stepped toward the stage, not to dominate it, but to end it. For 20 years, he said, turning slightly to address the room, I let the market assume ambition. I let the board assume aggression. I let headlines assume opportunism. His gaze swept across pale faces that had once shaken his hand in private and questioned his rise in public. I didn't correct it, he added, because results outlast rumors. The foundation director shifted, uncomfortably realizing how small he now appeared in contrast. Marcus turned back to Eleanor. You accuse me of theft, he said calmly. In a room funded by partnership, the words weren't revenge. They were record. You mistook restraint for strategy, he continued. And silence for guilt? A pause. Measured. Intentional. I didn't raise my voice, he said. He let the silence carry the weight. I raised the standard. The sentence settled like a gavel no one heard strike. Eleanor swallowed. I was wrong, she said, not loudly but audibly enough for the room to register it. The orchestra players exchanged glances. Trustees stood straighter. Phones lowered. The foundation director opened his mouth, then closed it. Because correction had already occurred. Marcus reached for his untouched champagne glass, lifting it briefly, not in celebration, not in triumph, but acknowledgement. To your father's legacy, he said quietly. Not ownership. Not control. Legacy. Eleanor nodded, eyes glistening but steady. And to accountability, she replied. A single violin resumed tentative at first, then joined by another. The blue light no longer felt cold. The gold no longer felt interrogative. The ballroom was a gala again, but it would never be the same room. Because tonight, under chandeliers and marble and curated history, the truth hadn't shouted. It had endured, and in enduring it had won.